A massive, honestly mind-boggling question. How did a remarkably small, rainy island nation end up building the largest and most powerful empire the world has ever seen? Over the next few minutes, we're going to unpack nearly 400 years of sprawling, complex, global history to objectively understand the mechanisms, the motivations, and the monumental shifts that completely defined the British Empire.
So let's just dive right in. If you look at Britain on a modern map today, you'd probably think, well, the story ends at its shores, right? But currently, the British government actually still governs 14 overseas territories. These are kind of the last remaining possessions of this once mighty empire, and they literally span the globe, from Gibraltar at the entrance of the Mediterranean, all the way down to the Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic.
But I want you to contrast that with just a little over a century ago. At its absolute height of territorial control, the British Empire covered a whopping 25%, a full quarter of the Earth's entire landmass. It ruled almost a third of the world's population. It was quite literally the empire on which the sun never set.
To wrap our heads around this immense 400-year chronological journey, we're going to navigate through 5 distinct eras: the foundations of empire, trade, rivalry, and revolution, the imperial century, the wind of change, and finally, the empire's modern legacy. We'll follow the logical flow of how this global superpower was built, piece by piece, and how it eventually unraveled.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the foundations of empire. We've got to start at the very beginning, in the early 17th century. This was actually a time before the state of Britain even formally existed. We're looking at the Kingdom of England, which had a well-developed economy and a strong military force, looking outward for new opportunities. And this early expansion didn't just happen by accident. It relied on a very specific operational blueprint. It actually started pretty close to home during the early years of King James' reign with the plantation of Ulster. This involved organizing and settling Protestant settlers from Scotland and England into parts of Northern Ireland. This organized colonization model formed the direct blueprint for future ventures over in the New World. At the exact same time, joint stock companies like the East India Company, founded in 1600, were granted royal charters. You can think of these as the world's very first mega-corporations, granted strict monopolies on all English trade in specific global regions.
Now imagine trying to run a country remotely across an entire ocean in the 1600s. No internet, no phones. To manage this sprawling bureaucracy, England relied on 3 distinct legal structures. First, you had crown colonies, which were directly ruled by the monarch through an appointed governor. Then charter colonies, ruled under a corporate charter, which actually granted colonists significantly more political liberty. And finally, proprietary colonies. These were commercial enterprises governed by the head of a joint stock company with heavy responsibilities to their shareholders. Over time, as those proprietary colonies became a lot harder to manage, many of them simply transitioned right into crown colonies.
Moving right along to Section 2, Trade, Rivalry, and Revolution. Heading into the late 1600s and early 1700s, these early colonial ambitions rapidly evolved. It became an era defined by fierce global competition, immense wealth generation, and eventual revolution. It's actually wild to look at the contrast here between nations. Throughout the 1600s, England's trading monopolies and overseas colonies were absolutely flourishing. Scotland, looking on pretty enviously, attempted to establish its own overseas colony in 1698 with the Darien Scheme. Their goal was to control the overland trade route of the Isthmus of Panama. And get this, the Scottish public invested almost a fifth of the nation's entire wealth into this. A fifth. It was an absolute disaster. They succumbed to food shortages, tropical disease, and Spanish attacks. The few survivors returned in total disgrace, plunging Scotland into a massive financial crisis. But this absolute ruin ultimately forced Scotland to share in England's success, leading directly to the 1707 Acts of Union, which officially united the two into one kingdom, Great Britain. Now, you have to understand that this newly unified Great Britain was basically powered by 2 unstoppable engines that worked hand in hand. Engine number 1 was mastery of the high seas through uncontested naval supremacy. Engine number 2 was ruthless, indomitable mercantile trade. And it is absolutely critical to note here that a highly lucrative component of this mercantile success was heavy participation in the brutal transatlantic slave trade, which was heavily managed by the Royal African Company created in 1660. Unfathomable wealth just poured into Britain through the taxation of all these goods passing through its ports. When you track the 18th century timeline, you see exactly how those 2 engines fueled major victories. Britain used its military and naval might to systematically strip territories away from its French and Spanish rivals. After the War of the Spanish Succession in 1714, Britain gained Newfoundland, plus the strategic Mediterranean islands of Gibraltar and Minorca. By 1759, they captured Quebec, effectively ending French colonial efforts in North America entirely. And the Treaty of Paris in 1763 ceded incredibly lucrative Caribbean islands over to Britain. They were now, without a doubt, the undisputed dominant colonial and maritime power of the age.
But, as you probably know, this massive wealth generation hit a brick wall. While Britain considered its colonies sovereign territory, it definitely didn't afford the colonists the same rights as people back on the British mainland. Parliament began heavily taxing the 13 American colonies without their consent or representation. And, well, we all know what happened next. This sparked a revolution in 1775, the Declaration of Independence in 1776, and by 1783, the complete loss of the American colonies. This marked a profound sea change. With America gone, we really have to ask this vital question about the empire's future: where does an expanding empire turn next?
Which brings us to Section 3, the Imperial Century. The answer to that big question? To the east and to the south. The loss of America essentially kicked off an era of unprecedented global dominance, spanning from 1815 to 1914, widely known today as Britain's Imperial Century. The gateway to this century was really forged in the fires of the Napoleonic Wars. After Admiral Lord Nelson's crucial naval victory at Trafalgar in 1805, which, by the way, eliminated the French invasion threat and secured uncontested British naval supremacy for the next 140 years, Britain basically swept up a massive portfolio of global assets by 1815. They secured the Cape Colony, Ceylon, Malta, Mauritius, and more. And these weren't just random plots of land. Think of them as the 19th century equivalent of global military bases, perfectly positioned to lock in vital maritime trade routes. During this period, the very nature of the empire actually shifted. The Industrial Revolution meant British merchants started focusing on producing manufactured goods at home rather than relying on slave-produced colonial goods. Combined with immense political pressure, this led to the abolition of the slave trade in 1807 and the institution of slavery itself in 1834. Consequently, the empire aggressively pivoted its focus toward Asia. Following the Opium Wars, they seized control of Hong Kong in 1842. And over in India, after the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857, the British government completely dissolved the East India Company, establishing direct government rule over India in 1858. India officially became the absolute most valuable possession within the empire, what they called the jewel in the crown. At the exact same time, the empire was feverishly defending its edges against emerging threats. Fearing Russian expansion into the Mediterranean and Middle East, Britain fought and defeated Russia in the Crimean War of 1854. Down in Africa, the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 was absolutely vital for linking the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, which prompted Britain to militarily occupy Egypt in 1882. And that move basically kicked off the staggering scale of the late 19th century scramble for Africa, where Britain consolidated immense, unprecedented power in the eastern and southern parts of the continent, eventually subduing independent republics in the south by the end of the Boer War in 1902.
That leads us to Section 4, the Wind of Change. As the 20th century dawned, the empire was hyperconnected by the All-Red Line.
This was essentially the Victorian internet of global telegraph cables. But the immense, staggering cost of modern, industrialized global conflict was about to fundamentally alter the empire's trajectory forever. The major threat came from Germany, with the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. During this massive conflict, Britain relied immensely on its overseas territories. I mean, not just for food and resources, but literally for survival. The numbers are just staggering. Over 2.5 million men from dominions and colonies, including India, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, served in the war, making the ultimate sacrifice for king and country. Britain won, and even annexed new territories, but the financial and human price was devastating.
Ironically, this rapid unraveling actually began right at the empire's absolute peak territorial size, right after World War I in 1921. The cracks were already showing, with Ireland gaining independence that very same year. Then came the Second World War in 1939. Though victorious again, Britain was completely bankrupted by it. It was simply no longer in any position to support its overstretched, questioning colonies. This triggered an unavoidable, massive wave of rapid decolonization throughout the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, known famously as the Wind of Change. While many nations opted to join the Commonwealth, the empire as a governing body was over. This all culminated in what many historians see as the final symbolic end, the 1997 handover of Hong Kong back to China.
And finally, Section 5, the empire's modern legacy. As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look at the present day.
What is the lasting footprint of these 400 years of sprawling, complex global history today? Well, today we see that enduring legacy literally everywhere. We see it in the fact that the English language is the most widely spoken on Earth. We see it in global legal systems and modern trade routes. But honestly, perhaps the most fascinating legacy is right back where it all started. Modern Britain itself is a vibrant, multicultural microcosm of the very empire it once built. It's filled with people of almost every race, nationality, religion, and culture that were once under British rule. So I'm going to leave you with this to think about. How does it change our perspective of modern history to realize that the island nation that exported its rule across the entire globe has now, in turn, been completely reshaped by the very world it sought to conquer?